We all rely on contracts to define risk, but what happens when the risk just completely explodes, beyond what's imaginable?
Mhm.
I'm talking about a multi-billion-dollar project, something critical, a new high-speed rail line, a major power plant, and it's suddenly halted.
Right.
And not by a simple supply chain issue, but because a massive hurricane veers off course, or a full-scale war breaks out nearby. Or, and this one is even stranger, you unearth a patch of radioactive waste on site that nobody knew was there.
And that is the ultimate test of any contract, really. For anyone operating in the huge world of international civil engineering,
Yep.
especially under the FIDIC framework, the protection against these existential threats is Clause 18.
Clause 18.
It defines and governs what we call exceptional events. It is, basically the rule book for surviving global chaos.
Okay, so our mission today is to give you the fast track to, let's say, contractual literacy when you're facing a disaster. This deep dive will uncover the four ironclad legal requirements. Think of them as four gates an event has to pass through to qualify.
And we'll also look at the surprisingly specific list of catastrophes the contract anticipates and the absolutely non-negotiable hard deadline for notification that determines if you actually get relief for time and cost.
So this is far more rigorous than a general force majeure provision you might see somewhere
Oh,
else.
absolutely. This is the big leagues.
Yeah.
To invoke the protection of an exceptional event, you have to satisfy four distinct legal conditions, all at the same time.
All four.
And if you fail to meet even one of these criteria, the clause offers zero relief, which, as you can imagine, can absolutely sink a massive project financially.
Okay, so let's set the foundation. This is not about being generally unlucky. This is about meeting a really high standard of unpredictability. What are, say, the first two gates that an event has to pass?
Well, the first condition is foundational. The event must be beyond a party's control.
Okay, that's logical. Standard stuff.
It is. But the second condition is where the rigor really starts to bite. The affected party has to show they could not reasonably have provided against it before entering into the contract.
That second point feels massive. It implies a really deep duty of due diligence. I mean, how does a company prove they couldn't reasonably have provided against a risk? It sounds like a huge legal gray area.
It is, and it's a deliberate test of foresight.
Yeah.
Look, if you're building a tunnel through known geological fault lines, seismic activity is predictable, right? So you have to include provisions for
They
it.
should have planned for it.
Exactly. If you build near an active, well-documented military base, heightened security is expected. The clause is targeting the truly unforeseen. It's meant to exclude risks that a competent contractor should have identified and, frankly, budgeted for during the tender process.
So you can't claim this clause just because you underbid the contingency.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now let's assume an event has passed those first two gates. It's outside your control. It's genuinely unforeseen. What are the final two hurdles?
Third, once it's arisen, the affected party must demonstrate they could not reasonably have avoided or overcome it.
So this isn't passive protection. It demands active mitigation.
Yes, you can't just stop work and wait. If a flood closes the main access road, you have to explore alternatives like, barge access or temporary bridges if those options are at all reasonable.
So the contract expects you to fight the crisis, not just throw your hands up.
Exactly. And the fourth point, it just ensures clean hands. The event must not be substantially attributable to the other party. This is a fundamental fairness rule.
Right.
The employer can't, for example, unilaterally start a public feud with the local government that leads to a political blockade and then try to claim an exceptional event to avoid penalties. All four conditions are non-negotiable.
Okay, we've established the strict legal framework. Now here's the really interesting part for a project manager or a risk assessor. The specific scenarios the contract explicitly anticipates. This isn't just a general list. It gets into actual specific catastrophes that may qualify.
Provided those four conditions are met, of course.
Of course.
And the list is really an education in global risk management, accumulated from decades of experience.
Yeah.
The biggest group is conflict and political upheaval. This includes everything from acts of foreign enemies, invasion, rebellion, terrorism, revolution, and civil war. The macro geopolitical risks that just fundamentally change the entire operating environment.
We hear those terms a lot in risk reports, but the contract also gets into smaller scale civil disorder, which can be just as disruptive. But there's a crucial limitation there, isn't there?
That's right. Riot, commotion, or disorder may qualify, but only if they originate from outside the project bubble. If the disruption is caused by people other than the contractor's own personnel or subcontractors, then it can be an exceptional event.
Ah, I see.
It's the difference between a regional political protest, shutting down your access, which is covered, versus, say, a violent dispute with your own labor union, which is not.
So if my company's workers go on an unauthorized wildcat strike over local management decisions, that's on me.
That's on you.
But if the National Railway Union goes on strike and I can't get materials delivered, that's external.
Precisely. And the same logic applies to specific labor issues like strikes or lockouts.
Right.
They only qualify if they do not solely involve the contractor's own people. The contract doesn't bail you out of your internal HR problems.
Right. Okay, so beyond the man-made chaos, we have the immense classic forces of nature.
Yes, the natural catastrophes. Earthquake, tsunami, volcanic activity, hurricane, or typhoon. And notice the list is specific. A major sustained flood might qualify if it's genuinely unforeseeable, but the clause really focuses on the sheer scale of those listed geological and meteorological events.
But the part that gives me pause, and really reflects the hidden risks of modern construction, is the inclusion of specific site hazards. Tell us about the strange things the contract explicitly warns us about finding underground.
This is one of the most unique and I think important inclusions. The explicit risk of encountering munitions of war, explosive materials, ionizing radiation, or contamination by radioactivity.
Wow.
The contract writers know that major civil works often involve digging up history. And, well, history is sometimes dangerous.
Wait, so they specifically list discovering radioactive contamination as a contractual contingency right alongside terrorism and war. That's chilling. Why would a standard global contract need to anticipate unearthing unknown explosives or radiation?
It just reveals the reality of working globally. You might be in a region that saw conflict 50 years ago, or digging on a site that was once an unregulated industrial dumping ground. The risk of encountering unexploded ordnance or legacy industrial waste is high enough that it requires its own dedicated, explicit contractual treatment.
You can't just hope it falls under a general hazard clause.
No, you can't. And just like with strikes, there's a crucial exception here to prevent abuse.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
You can't cause it yourself.
Absolutely. The site risk clause only applies unless the contamination or materials are attributable to the contractor's own use. You can't contaminate the site yourself and then claim relief. It protects against the discovery of pre-existing hidden dangers.
We've set out the criteria and the list of horrors. Now let's move to what might be the most financially lethal element of the entire clause: the timing. So we've established the event is an exceptional event. What must the affected party do immediately?
This is where so many claims fail. We're now talking about the hard deadline of disaster. The affected party has to promptly give notice to the other party, detailing which specific contractual obligations are being prevented.
And this is not a casual email.
No, this is formal, legally specific notification.
So what is the absolute non-negotiable deadline for that notice?
It is the infamous 14-day rule. The notice has to be served within 14 days after the affected party became aware, or should reasonably have become aware, of the exceptional event.
That is an extremely tight window, especially when you consider the chaos that might surround a typhoon or a sudden civil war. Okay, so 14 days. Let's say a major earthquake hits your site. You spend the first week just ensuring the safety of your team, stabilizing equipment. You finally get a communication link up on day 10. You think, great, I have 4 more days. What happens if you miss that deadline by just 1 week and send the notice on day 21?
The consequences are severe, and they are retrospective. If that notice is received late, the affected party is excused from performance only from the date the notice is actually received.
Wow.
You don't get excused for the period between the start of the event and the day the notice lands on the other party's desk.
So in that example, if the delay in costs started on day 1, but the employer only gave a notice on day 21, the contractor legally bears all the time and cost risk for those first 20 days.
That's a 20-day completely uncompensated delay. If the project is worth billions, those days could represent millions in delay costs, liquidated damages, exposure, you name it. The strictness of the clock forces prompt action, even in the middle of chaos.
Now, despite the project being halted by war or disaster, there's one contractual duty that remains absolutely sacred.
Cash flow. The clause makes it absolutely clear. The obligation of either party to make payments due to the other party under the contract shall not be excused by an exceptional event.
So even if your site is under siege, you still have to pay your subcontractors and suppliers if those payments are due.
Yes. It protects the financial stability of the entire contracting chain.
That's a huge clarification. The project can stop, but the accounting department cannot. So, beyond that initial 14-day alert, what is the contractor's ongoing responsibility while the event is active?
It's a continuous duty to mitigate under Clause 18.3. Both parties have to use all reasonable endeavors to minimize any delay.
Yeah.
And if the event is ongoing, say, a slow-moving political crisis, the affected party must give further notices describing the continuing effect every 28 days after that initial notice.
So the 28-day update keeps the employer informed of mitigation efforts and the project impact. And the moment it clears up,
Immediate notification. They have to immediately give notice when the event ceases to affect performance. The paperwork only stops when the chaos does.
okay, so assuming the contractor has perfectly navigated this perilous notification schedule, the 14-day clock, the 28-day updates, the mitigation efforts, what are the tangible entitlements they actually get?
Well, the first, universal entitlement, is an EOT, an extension of time. This allows the contractor to legally extend the completion date without incurring penalties. And this is granted for all qualifying exceptional events.
But the real financial relief, I imagine, comes with the ability to recover cost. What's the difference between cost and profit here, and when is that cost recovery granted?
That's the most critical distinction. Cost typically means the expenditure reasonably and properly incurred by the contractor on or off the site, including overheads. But, and this is important, it does not include any element of profit.
I see.
This clause is usually designed to make the contractor financially whole, to zero out the loss from the event, not to allow them to profit from a disaster.
So an EOT protects the schedule, and cost recovery protects the balance sheet, but only to break even. Now, which events qualify for this precious cost recovery, and which only get the schedule extension?
This is where we break the events into two critical groups. The contractor is entitled to both an EOT and payment of cost only if the event is on that specific list of man-made or hidden hazards. Think of it as the war and contamination list.
The man-made catastrophes.
Exactly. This covers war, rebellion, terrorism, civil disorder, strikes, and those specific site contamination risks, like radiation or munitions. If the delay is caused by one of these, you get time and money in the form of cost.
And the pure natural disasters, the hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes.
They fall outside that cost recovery list. They grant an EOT, an extension of time, but typically the contractor bears the resulting cost. Unless, of course, the governing law dictates otherwise, or the contract has special amendments.
That is a staggering financial distinction. If you're building in a politically volatile region, your contract contingency is fundamentally different than if you're building in a high seismic zone.
Absolutely. The contract recognizes that man-made political chaos is often treated differently than pure acts of God. And there's another detail. For most of that war and contamination list, the event must also have occurred in the country where the works are being executed to get that cost recovery.
Okay, so what happens when the chaos doesn't stop? When the war or the contamination is so severe, so sustained that continuing the project just becomes a bad idea for everyone?
Well, the clause provides a clear exit strategy, optional termination under 18.5. Either party can terminate the contract, but only after specific extended periods of prevention.
And what are those thresholds for walking away?
You can terminate if execution of substantially all the works is prevented for a continuous period of 84 days.
That's exactly 12 weeks.
Right. Or if the disruption is intermittent but adds up.
Oh, interesting.
You can also terminate if the project is prevented for multiple non-continuous periods, which total more than 140 days due to the same exceptional event.
So once that threshold is crossed, either party can give notice, and the contract officially ends 7 days later.
That's it.
When a project terminates under these catastrophic conditions, the final payment must be incredibly complex. How do they disentangle the parties fairly? What does the contractor get paid for?
It is a meticulously certified payment. The engineer has to account for several specific items to ensure fairness. First, the value of work properly done. Second, the cost of plant and materials ordered and delivered, which then become the employer's property.
So the employer takes ownership of the raw materials even if they're not installed.
Correct. Crucially, the payment also covers any other costs or liability reasonably incurred in expectation of completing the works. This captures sunk costs that don't fit neatly into other categories. And finally, the payment covers the full demobilization costs.
Like getting equipment off-site.
Exactly. The cost of removal of temporary works and contractors' equipment from the site and return to their place of business.
And what about the human element? The team on the ground?
That's included in the final payment, too. The cost of repatriation of the contractor's staff and labor employed wholly in connection with the works. The employer helps fund the journey home for the team when the project is canceled.
Finally, we have to acknowledge that sometimes the law of the land just overrides the contract. What if an event is so disruptive that even Clause 18 can't cope, or a national law makes performance impossible?
That is covered by Clause 18.6, release from performance under governing law. And this applies if an event, even one not strictly defined as an exceptional event, makes it impossible or unlawful for either party to fulfill their contractual obligations.
Like if a new environmental regulation makes the agreed-upon method of construction illegal?
That's a perfect example. Or if local law has a mandatory provision for termination based on extreme change in circumstance. If the parties are entitled to be released from further performance and they can't agree on a contract element to continue, they are discharged from performance.
And the final financial outcome in that scenario. Does the payment just revert to a messy negotiation?
No, and this is the elegance of the FIDIC structure. The amount payable to the contractor in that scenario release under law is calculated exactly the same way as the payment under the optional termination clause we just discussed.
So you get that same exhaustive list of costs certified by the engineer.
Yes, ensuring a consistent and structured exit, regardless of whether you terminated under contract rules or local law.
So what does this all boil down to? We've seen that the contract treats unforeseeable events with astonishing precision, but that precision is basically worthless without strict adherence to process. The entire claim really just hangs on that 14-day notification clock.
That's the key takeaway. You have to react immediately and methodically, even in chaos. The failure to notify within 2 weeks can legally erase millions of dollars in claims. This clause is really a masterclass in process-driven risk mitigation.
I want to return to that detail we found so fascinating, including the unearthing of munitions and unforeseen radioactive contamination in the same category as terrorism for cost recovery. What does that specific inclusion ultimately tell you about the inherent hidden risks faced by the world's largest infrastructure builders?
It tells us that major civil engineering is inherently an act of unearthing buried risk. And sometimes the biggest threats aren't the dramatic, visible crises like a volcano or a war. They're the invisible legacy threats lurking just under the surface. It's a reminder that a contract must budget for the fact that beneath every construction site lies the potential for forgotten history to suddenly become a radioactive multi-million-dollar problem. That dual threat of political instability and unforeseen contamination is a complexity that informs every major construction bid today.